Welcome to the G-Spot.
Five, four, three, two, one.
Hello everybody and welcome to Dynamic GT League's G-Spot for episode 35 of the G-Spot. It's been a long time since we've done a G-Spot, and joining us is nobody, unfortunately, because we haven't had the time to get together with Ray or any of the other admins to get this G-Spot done, so I'm solo today. I'm Han Solo, but then that's every day. Okay, enough nonsense. What is the DGT-G-Spot all about? Well, it's a place where we can look at the weird and wonderful things that happen in the Dynamic GT League. Things that the drivers can bring to our attention, whether it be serious or funny, as we've seen people in the past, for example, hitting pit walls. But also, if clarifications get asked for, or if reports get put in, we can also take a look at those, and obviously we do our steward reports, but having the video there to show as well, I do think it's a very, very useful piece of information. It's one of those things, reading something is not as exciting as watching it as well. Well, I suppose it depends on what you're reading. I mean, I've never read Lord of the Rings. I'm quite happy with the film, but I suppose some people would say that the books are better. Anyway, enough waffle. We're going to crack on. We've got 4 things. Well, it's kind of 4.5 things to look at. So let's not hang about. We'll crack on. G1. Hey Jimmy, how's your wheel? Okay, so Rich has sent this one in. It says on the start, finish straight. Approximately 22 minutes and 10 seconds into the race video. Rich and Jimmy both disagreed at who was at fault with this one. Now, the steward's verdict is no penalty. This was deemed as a racing contact with both cars merging towards each other through the left kink. Rich drifted to the right while Jimmy was still applying steering to the left. So both cars coming together in the middle of the road, and we can have a look at that now. So we can see Rich and Jimmy heading down towards the left kink. Rich taking a wider line, going for a little switcheroo, and then both cars coming together. That's sort of from Rich's view. We'll have a look at it from Jimmy's view. So Jimmy looking up Bob, and there's Rich, and from that view it does look like Rich does tag the back of Jimmy, but what we're going to do is we're going to look at it in slow motion. I'm not going to talk, but look at Jimmy's steering angle. That little bit of turn left just moved him to the middle of the road. If we watch Rich's steering, that little moment of straightening up the steering happens at the same time as Jimmy's turning left. And that's where the merging of the two comes together. Just an extremely unfortunate situation there. Could have been avoided. Both drivers could have done more to avoid it, but couldn't really put any blame on either one, really. So there we go. G2, Art Powell, clarification please, did I do wrong? Okay, so 40-40 from Art Powell. This isn't a report for a penalty, but would like clarification. I think the gap was closed by Connor a little late. We collided. I waited for him. Not sure if my expects there would be more space is incorrect or not. The steward's verdict on this, although this isn't a report, the stewards have looked at it to give their clarification on it. Connor did move across to the left in front of Art Powell before the normal turn-in point for the corner, which gave Art Powell no chance to avoid contact. However, the stewards also feel Art Powell made a late move and would not have been able to make the corner without hitting Connor, so did the right thing by waiting. A little bit I want to add on to that, or to just make things a little clearer there, is yes, Connor's moved a little late, which gives Art Powell no opportunity to avoid him. but Art Pal has gone for a slightly low overtake as well. And the bit about Art Pal not making the corner, you'll see on the video that Art Pal only just gets the car stopped before going off the track on the outside. So let's take a look at that then. So we can see Art Pal here with Connor ahead. Connor moves left, absolutely fine doing that. Moves back across, also absolutely fine. Into the braking zone, Art Pal looks on the inside. Connor moves across. There is contact, and yeah, Art Pal does stay slowed down and wait for Conrad to come past. So let's look at this in a little more detail then. So Conrad's initial moves absolutely fine, but as we're getting to the braking zone, we're going to take a look from the side here, and this does give a good view of, yeah, it's a little bit too far back really to be attempting an overtake down into turn 1 here. There's not much chance of Conrad being able to expect a car at the corner or anyone that's ahead. So as this goes on slowly forward, obviously we see that Art Pal is looking up the inside, so he's definitely not going to the back of Conrad, but then Conrad does move across, and this is where this sort of late move definitely comes in. So it's kind of like, it's not necessarily 2 wrongs make a right, but it is a late move from Art Pal, but it is also a late defense by Conrad, and Art Pal can't avoid the contact at that point. So as we look at it again in full speed, and what I want you to see here is the amount of braking applied by Art Pal and where the car ends up. So he's fully on the brakes and ends up right out wide at the track. So even if Conrad hadn't moved across, we don't feel that Art Pal would have got the car slowed down and kept a tight enough line to go round the corner, leaving space on the outside for Conrad. So there's that one. G3, Gary getting hit off and getting a penalty. Okay, so good evening chaps. Obviously this will most certainly be brought up. Last lap in the race I got hit off. Obviously Bob waited, but I got a 1.5 second penalty, which then Bob retakes me on the straight when serving the penalty, or when I'm serving the penalty. I feel this is very unfair in my opinion, plus several occasions I got hit sideways, causing me to get a penalty. Surely if someone hits you past or off track limits, they should, 1, have to wait, and 2, get the penalty. I know this is set in the game, and this could especially cause an issue in a championship battle, for example, with contact causing that driver to get a penalty where they could have come back and got the win. Just think it needs a serious rethink. Cheers, admins. Okay, so the stewards stroke admins have looked at this one, and there's a lot to sort of go about here, so here we go. No penalty. Quite a lot happened in this incident, with Gary initially cutting the corner through the first right-hander after not being left enough space by Rich, with the pair then making contact. Gary then gets hit off by Bob at the second right-hander. The penalty was in fact given to Gary for cutting the previous corner while battling Rich, not for being pushed off by Bob. So Bob did the right thing in waiting and did not need to wait for Gary to serve his penalty. The admins have noted that there were instances during the race where drivers received penalties for being pushed off track, or believe they were, by another car, and understand why some drivers may be frustrated by this. The admins will discuss this issue and decide how to proceed. And I can tell you the admins have discussed this issue and have made a decision on how to proceed, and that is the admins' announcement that's going to be at the end of this G-Spot. Okay, a lot going on then, so let's not faff about, let's crack on. Okay, so we see Gary heading to the right-handers, and this is going to get hit by Bob from behind, and we can see that he has got a penalty that shows on the screen. But this is where other information is very useful. So Rich and Gary are side by side, and Gary is off the track, way off the track. although there's more to it than that. Bob does come in and make contact with Gary, and we have just seen that. Okay, so let's take a look at this then. So Rich and Gary are side by side, and unfortunately Rich has not left Gary anywhere near enough space to go around the corner, and Gary has kind of taken evasive here. It does mean that he's way off the track, and this is what Gary gets the penalty for. There is a little bit of contact with Rich Blues here, but I can't really blame Gary for that one because he should have been on the road anyway. Rich does then end up going off over to the left, and we'll cover that a little later on. So Gary's penalty that is going to pop up in a moment is for the cut that's just happened, but we're going to play this in slow motion, and you'll see that the contact with from Bob's car happens, then the penalty appears on the screen, which is going to be coming now. There's Rich's bonnet, and here comes Bob's bonnet. There's the contact, and there's the penalty. So Bob can't have got Gary the penalty because Gary's got the penalty now before he's off track from Bob hitting him. Also, the penalties don't get given that quickly. What tends to happen is you get them a few seconds after your infringement. So we'll go, that's where Gary ends up off, and Gary doesn't get a penalty for being off track there, but he obviously Bob waited for him for knocking him off. So we'll look from Rich now, and we can see that, yeah, Rich hasn't left Gary the room. There's a little bit of contact. Rich has a wobble. Rich goes off. Contact with Bob. And then Rich around here gets a 3-second penalty. Now, if we look at this in slow motion, you'll see that, once again, Rich and Gary. Unfortunately, Rich hasn't left Gary enough space. I don't know if he didn't know he was there or not. But this is kind of like, not that two wrongs make, or one wrong makes another wrong okay, but looking at this, Gary should be on the track. So with Gary trying to get back on the track, a contact is always going to happen here, but Gary should have been given the space there. Now, Rich did message me personally asking me to have a look into this and see what my thoughts were. Well, unfortunately for Rich, the contact is kind of his own fault, and his car almost goes off the track here. But what I'll say is that's about as far as his car goes off track. But unfortunately, as Rich continues on, he could go right and get back on the track, but whether he's chosen to or not, he's got left steering on now. His car now, this is a point actually where the stewards would say he was back in control of his car. Now he cuts the corner. So Rich's 3-second penalty, I personally wouldn't blame Gary for that. And I'll go through the exact reasons why in a moment. So we can see that Rich was a naughty boy here, cutting the corner. But as we see it all then in normal speed, it does happen very quickly. And I can understand both Gary and Rich's frustration with this one. But I think hopefully when looking at it on the footage here, they'll be able to understand why we've said what we have. Now, I can understand Gary thinking that he'd got the penalty from being hit off by Bob. He may not have realised the timing of that. He may not have realised he'd cut the corner previously. Honestly, it can happen. I've done it myself. For Rich, I can understand as well him being frustrated, thinking that Gary's hit him off and that's resulted in him getting the penalty. But from my own personal thought process there is, it's going to sound a little harsh this, but the reason Gary's hit Rich is Rich's fault, because Rich should have left Gary the space. So the reason the contact happens is Rich's, that's on Rich. Rich's car almost goes off the track. He's managed to save it. He's done really well there. But then there's a point where, as a steward, I would go, right, when is he then in control of his car? And there is a point where Rich's car goes as far left as it's going to go, then it sort of straightens up, goes right a bit, and then goes left again. So that transition point of it's gone as far left as it's going to go and it's now coming back to the right, that's the point where I would say Rich is now in control of his car, and Rich then cutting the corner or going off track. I'm not going to say cutting the corner because that's a bit harsh. Rich then going off track, I would say, is on him. So the 3-second penalty I wouldn't blame Gary for. However, in that situation at that time, can fully understand why anyone would be frustrated about that. Obviously, we mentioned as well, hopefully, Rich, that's cleared that up with that one, even if you disagree. But that's my genuine thought on it. I haven't asked the other admins about that one, but they have looked at it because, as we mentioned, part of one of the things that was noted at the end of that report by the stewards and the admins was that we would be looking into the penalty decision. So I think it's time we crack on with the next one. Gee whiz, the admin's announcement. Okay, so something that came to our attention, that Gary brought to our attention, was what could happen if, let's say, for example, Bob had hit Gary had gone off the track, and Gary had got the penalty for that. Because in the current DGT rules, then Bob would have done exactly what was expected of him. He waited for Gary, let Gary go through. But then what would have happened after that is we get to the penalty zone, Gary serves his penalty, and Bob would have ended up ahead of him, or potentially ended up ahead of him. Now, that obviously doesn't quite sound right. Now, during the race, I know myself, I hit Art Powell. I think it might have been in the same corner, and I definitely hit him off the track, and he got a penalty. I believe he got a penalty. I think actually it was a similar situation to Rich and Gary. Actually, I was on the right, Art Powell was on the left, and I'm pretty sure I felt I had a wobble, hit Art Powell off the track, and he got a penalty like Rich did. But it was very different to exactly the Rich and Gary one. Same location, different scenario. So I did wait for Art Powell because I'd hit him off the track. But then as I got to the penalty area and saw him being slowed down, and I went flying past him, something in my brain, yes, I've got one, just sort of clicked and went, that's not right. So I did actually pull over and wait for Art Powell, even though there is nothing in the rules that says that I have to. I just felt it was the right thing to do at that time. So had Gary not brought this to the admin's attention, I would have been bringing it to their attention as well, bringing it to their attention anyway, with me and Art Powell being an example of it, and how, it wouldn't have been right for me to just carry on. So that then obviously leads the admins to have quite a lot of discussion about what to do, because it wouldn't be right. If you've hit someone off and they've got a penalty, when they serve that penalty, it wouldn't be right if you end up ahead of them. But at the same time, it wouldn't be right to ask somebody to wait straight away or as soon as possible and then wait again. That would be penalising someone twice. And we wouldn't want to pass a penalty over from one person to another, especially a time penalty, because the way that we run things, time penalties aren't functional for us when it comes to the end of a race, because of having the boost and things like that. So many discussions about what to do, what we could do, and all that kind of stuff. And a decision has been made, and so I will go through that decision, and I shall read it out to you. Okay, the admin's announcement then is as follows. With immediate effect, the corner cut penalties will be turned off. They may be included for special events in the future, such as the ARC, which is the annual race of champions or something like that. I can't remember what it is, but it's an annual race. This is due to a situation that was pointed out to the admins that a driver could receive a penalty due to no fault of their own. The admins have looked into ways of how the penalty system could be kept, but it would cause more problems than it's worth. This is not a green light to start cutting corners, as the normal DGT track limits rules will apply. The white line is the track limit unless there is a painted curb that runs parallel to the track, then we include the curb as the track limit. Some part of a tyre must stay within the track limits, so it is acceptable to have 3.5 tyres over the track limits. If you exceed track limits, you must not gain a lasting advantage. So that's the announcement there. Now some people may sort of question, well, could you not have done this, could you not have done that? One of the things that one of the admins sort of made the point of, basically what we did, we discussed this a lot on the day of stewarding. We discussed like what we could do, and it was that important that we decided to give ourselves a few days to think it over, see if we can come up with any ideas, and see what we really genuinely think about it over the course of a few days. We'll reconvene and then we'll have another conversation, and this was the outcome. To be honest, it was a good idea giving us those days to think about it. And the point that was made by one of the admins was that when this league was started, one of the key ideas was to keep things as simple as possible for the running of the league. We don't want to make things so complicated that it's difficult to run. It involves a load of work, or a load of rules, or subsections of rules, and keeping the track limits penalty system in place at the moment would mean adjusting the rules, having subsections of rules. So just to give an idea, so hypothetical, the situation with Bob and Gary. Bob hits Gary, Gary goes off, Gary gets penalty. So what do? Do we say, okay, so Bob has to give the place back and wait for Gary, but what he's got to do is make sure he's behind Gary once Gary has served that penalty. Okay, well that could work. Okay, but what if Gary then gets another penalty on his own on the way to the penalty zone? Does Bob have to still wait for that full amount of time? Because that wouldn't seem right, would it? Also, what would happen if on the way to the penalty zone, Gary gets taken out by someone else? Well, does that mean that Bob could carry on? Okay, so that's just two examples. Well, what happens when you get a penalty so close to the penalty serving area that you don't get to serve the penalty until the next lap? Does that mean that the person who caused it also has to wait that next lap? Well, that seems a bit wrong as well. Okay, so that's just three quick examples of other factors that could come into it, which instantly create a lot more work for the admins, a lot more work for the stewards, a lot more information for the drivers to try and digest in a live situation. Like, for example, this one as well. Okay, let's say what would the penalty be for someone that did cause that incident and didn't wait? There's so many factors that just make it harder and harder and harder to sort of police and deal with. So yeah, the point that the admin made of one of the key points of this league was to try and keep things as simple as possible. It makes sense that the best way to deal with that situation then is go, well, let's get rid of the in-game penalty system. A little bit like we got rid of the yellow flag system because that wasn't quite working how we wanted it to. So yeah, by turning it off, it means any of those what-if situations now no longer are a problem. You hit somebody off track, you wait for them. If you don't wait for them, you get a penalty. It's simple. That's why that rule is there like that. So hopefully, drivers, you can understand why we've gone down this route. And as much as we like the risk factor of having those time penalties there, the negatives outweigh the positives for us at the moment. However, as we've said, in a situation like an ARC event or something like that, we could bring it back, or maybe if it could be different cars or a different format, we could bring it back. But as it says on the screen at the moment, this is not a green light to just start cutting corners. The normal DGT track limits will still apply, but hopefully, yeah, just makes things a lot simpler for everybody regarding that. Now, if any of the drivers do have any questions about other stuff, feel free to give us a shout. If we can answer them, we will. But if it's perhaps something that we are already looking into, but we haven't got all the information to give out at the moment, maybe we might just ask you to be a little bit patient until we can gather information, or like with this one, just give us a few days to perhaps ponder things and work things out. So as an example, there was the comment made by one of the admins the other day about maybe we could start looking for a couple of new drivers, and one of the comments made in that chat was, well, if that's something we're going to do, let's involve all of the drivers in that, because it's good. That's something that affects every single one of us. So if anybody has any ideas about how to recruit new drivers, or perhaps a way to go about it, feel free to get in touch with us. It is something that we're going to openly chat about in the very near future. It's just with this current situation that we've dealt with and a couple of other things, that's been put a little bit on the back burner. Right, sorry to have waffled on. Also, apologies that Ray's not here. He's probably pissed up somewhere. Would you believe it? A Scotsman drank an alcoholic drink and had an allergic reaction to it on his skin. I've never heard of such a thing. I don't know. Shocking. Absolutely shocking. Right, have a good one, everybody. Thanks for watching, listening. Feel free to join us for the next G-Spot, whenever that may be. That's what she said.